As Philippians chapter 1 ends with a confession of what God accomplished through Christ for believers, resulting in a charge to suffer joyfully, like the imprisoned Paul, Philippians chapter 2 explains how the Philippians should do this. Paul reminds them of what they have entered into as a Christian community and what they have received because of Christ's sacrifice. Delivering what scholars consider the Philippian hymn, Paul lifts up the example of Jesus, drawing on the Christological doctrines of Christ's preexistence, his divinity and humanity, his subjection and obedience to the Father, his suffering on the cross, and his resurrection to accomplish salvation for all humankind. Paul uses Christ's humility as exhibited in his earthly ministry as a model for believers to embrace and embody as individuals for the benefit and unity of the entire community. And this brings us to our key verse for today, which reads, "Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves." Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Paul points out that humility is the key to unity, while pride breeds strife and contention. The overarching concern here is selfishness or lack of concern for the affairs of other people, which would show an absence of the love that Paul spoke of just before. The attitude that Paul has been explaining and hoping the Philippians to have corresponds with the attitude displayed by Christ. Elsewhere in his epistles, Paul uses the life and death of Christ as a pattern for Christians to follow. While we cannot copy Christ's work of salvation, we can copy the spiritual basis to these acts, his love, humility, and servitude to others. These are the attitudes or disposition which was also in Christ Jesus. Although he was equal with God in his divine nature, Jesus did not think this equality as something to be seized upon or to be held fast or held on to. This means that Christ possessed the divine nature and was, by all accounts, equal with God and had the right to hold tight to it and use it to his own advantage. To be in the form of God or possessing the divine nature, and for that matter, being equal with God, is a position of honor, respect, and pride with many advantages, a position no mere human would ever want to give up. Contrary to this human evaluation, Christ did not view his equality with the Father as a position to greedily and selfishly hold on to, but used it for the benefit of others. Paul clearly states that rather than holding tight to his divine nature and equality with God, Christ voluntarily made himself of no reputation while on earth. Although he was and is and ever remains God, the Son laid aside all these things while retaining his divine nature and functioned as a human as he assumed human form. Paul continues to describe the thought of Christ's humility as shown not only by his assuming human form in the role of a servant, but by humbling himself to such a degree of acceptance of subjecting himself to the most humiliating type of death, crucifixion. This, Paul seems to convey, is the lowest step of humility. His obedience has no limits. If Christ humiliated himself and went so low as to die, the Philippians, and indeed all believers, should constantly endeavor to follow their Master's example of humility and strive to achieve the spirit of oneness among themselves. He humbled himself, therefore he was exalted, which follows the natural and divine order of things as taught by Christ himself. Here Christ is exalted beyond measure, to a point after which nothing is higher. He is also granted or bestowed the greatest name that surpasses all thinkable names. The name is now bestowed to the historical Jesus, who humbled himself to the lowest death, took up the role of a slave, and became human in time and space. He who was obedient even to death is to be obeyed and worshipped and confessed as Lord by every being in God's creation. So here's our lesson. Humility is to lift others out of sin and suffering, not to humiliate them or ourselves needlessly. Through humility, we are to look for those who are suffering and place their needs and interests above ours. When we do this, we fulfill the Christian mandate of humility by serving others and lifting ourselves together to God through Christ.